And I'm going to be taking you through Certified Stores and Stock Controller program. Let's have a look at the contents of this particular program. It covers 5 modules. The first module is the Introduction to Stores and Stock Control. We're going to talk about warehousing and how that fits into supply chain management. We're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities and relationships within the warehouse. And of course, the important subject of customer service. Module 2 is going to be about stores, safety and security. In the warehouse, there are risks and safety management is very important. So warehouse safety and the correct personal protective equipment that should be worn is important. We'll also look at emergency situations and what precautions one needs to take. The third module is about stores operation. We'll talk about the store's layout, the store's productivity, and continuous improvement of the processes in the warehouse. We'll talk about materials handling and the storage equipment that we have in the warehouse, and then about transportation. The fourth module is about stock identification and stock control. There we're going to talk about classifying stock and coding the stock items. We'll also talk about stock taking and stock audits, and in particular cycle counting. Module 5 is about stock movement. There we're going to talk about inbound logistics. We'll talk about stores issues. We'll talk about stores returns, reverse logistics, and distribution management. So let's look at module 1.1, which is about warehousing and supply chain management. We'll talk about warehousing, different types of warehouses, areas of warehouse responsibility. We'll talk about the warehouse in the supply chain and areas of supply chain excellence. Order winners and order qualifiers are pretty important in our business, so we'll discuss a little around that. We'll talk about stock control. We'll talk about warehouse management systems, or WMS for short. We'll talk about warehouse organization and warehouse performance measures. So what are the learning outcomes of this first module here? The role of the store and the role of the warehouse in a manufacturing environment. Describe the basic layout of a manufacturing warehouse facility. Different types of manufacturing warehouses. The objectives of warehouse operations. The different types of warehouses. An explanation of the areas of responsibility assigned to a warehouse. Compare and contrast centralized warehousing and decentralized warehousing, and give the advantages and disadvantages of each. The components of a warehouse management system, the operation of a warehouse management system, AWMS.
The conceptual framework
in this module. A warehouse is essentially a resting place where large quantities of materials or goods are held to meet anticipated customers' needs. And the goal of warehousing is to have the right material in the right quantity, in the right quality, at the right place at the right time when needed. There are a number of different types of warehouses situated strategically along the supply chain, each performing one or more specific functions. And the areas of responsibility within the warehouse range from the receipt of goods through to its eventual distribution to the customers. The supply chain encompasses a number of processes stretching across a number of supplier, producer, customer linkages. And a supply chain may encompass the process of reverse logistics and recycling of used materials. Stock control is a task with the responsibility of controlling goods into, through, and out of the warehouse. And a warehouse management system assists the warehouse manager in managing and controlling each of these warehouse activities. A warehouse organization can be based on a centralized or a decentralized structure. And lastly, their warehouse performance measures are established for inventory management, order fulfillment, and warehouse productivity. Let's have a look at module 1.2. Talk about roles and responsibilities and relationships, leaders and leadership, and as leadership styles, and team members and the roles and responsibilities of these team members and their skills and their abilities that are required. We'll also talk about policies and procedures and the procedure manual that's an important part of the warehouse, as well as relationships with other departments within the organization. So if we look at the learning outcomes, we have a range of leadership styles. Identify the applications for each of these styles. We're going to compare and contrast the role of the leader with the role of the team members. Explanations of the activities of the warehouse team manager. The principal duties of the team leader in managing warehouse activities. Duties of the warehouse team. Discuss between a policy and a procedure and give examples of each in a warehouse setting, what a guideline and best practice and a position statement are in the policy and procedure manual. Explanation of how the warehouse interacts.
The conceptual framework
In this module, a leader is somebody who achieves results through others. Leaders are not born, they are made. And the three principal leadership styles are autocratic, democratic, and free reign. Team managers, team leaders, and team members each have a specific role or roles to play in the day-to-day operation of the warehouse. And the warehouse team works closely with their customers and are responsible for handling large quantities of goods on their behalf. A warehouse team member must possess a number of specific attributes to be able to successfully execute his responsibilities. And policies and broad guidelines, procedures, translate policies into specific instructions, which in turn guide the operations of the warehouse. Policies and procedures must be a live document, documents which need to be adapted to meet the working environment of the warehouse as circumstances change or are dictated. The warehouse provides a service to its customers and therefore needs to form an effective working relationship with each of the user groups. Effective communication channels are essential to the successful operation of a warehouse. And finally, the warehouse team is the backbone of an efficient and effective warehouse operation. Let's go through module 1.3 on customer service. We'll look at the meaning of a customer and the measurement of customer service and the quantitative measures for customer service, and then customer service and the customer. Some of the learning outcomes will be explanation of the meaning of the word customer, distinguish between customer satisfaction, customer dissatisfaction, and customer delight. Key components of customer service, importance of the customer and the customer service to a business, and the steps a company can take to increase the level of service.
The conceptual framework
In this module, customer service is about delighting customers and not just simply satisfying customers. Customer service can be described as the ability to meet customer needs at the requested time, and customer service criteria should first be assessed through the eyes of the customer. Companies are only in business because they have customers, and tell a customer what he needs to know, not what he would like to hear. This way a company will keep his existing customers and gain new ones. And then customer performance measures must be quantifiable to be meaningful. Module 2.1, and here we're going to be talking about risk and safety management. We'll look at risk management and safety responsibilities, as well as the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We'll consider accident situations, employee theft, and how do we prevent theft within our warehouse data security, and physical security applications. We'll also look at identity theft, which seems to be on the rise, and a warehouse security exercise, learning outcome, what a risk is, and describe how risks can be identified and effectively managed. A number of risks associated with the operation of a warehouse, description of the Occupational Health and Safety Act as it applies to the operations of the warehouse activities, and the responsibilities for safety and security in a warehouse environment, and distinguish between an unsafe act and an unsafe condition, and look at some examples of each. Identify areas in a warehouse where the potential for theft is evident. Outline actions to minimize these risks. And then we want to define identity theft. Name the steps that could be taken to prevent a breach of company security and the personal security of the company's personnel. And finally, draw a floor plan of a warehouse and indicate what actions should be implemented to make the facility more secure.
The conceptual framework
In this module, a risk is the combination of the probability of an event occurring and its consequences. The Occupational Health and Safety Act is promulgated by Parliament of the country, and two measures of accidents are the injury incident rate and the injury frequency rate. Any accident that occurs in a warehouse must be immediately identified, reported, and investigated. Employee theft is among removal, use or misuse of employers' assets without permission to do so. And the best way to prevent employee theft is to hire the right people and make it difficult for the would-be thief to gain unauthorized access to property and information. Data security and identity theft are made easier in the electronic age we live in. We need to be careful. The decision to use internal and external security service has a number of consequences. Cargo theft occurs in freight forwarding yards, warehouses, and during transportation. And lastly, we looked at a well-designed warehouse layout that can help reduce the incidence of theft and protect the company's property. Module 2.2, Warehouse Safety and Personal Protective Equipment. We're going to talk about practicing safety in the warehouse and the fact that accidents cost money, and then about safety in you and first aid, and then about various personal protective equipment that we might use in the warehouse and different categories of PPE. The learning outcomes in this module: importance of practicing safety in both the warehouse and also in the surrounding areas, importance of safe operating practices and good housekeeping practices in a warehouse environment, why occupational diseases are more difficult to identify than occupational safety issues in the warehouse, costs associated with an accident in the warehouse, a safety checklist for use in a warehouse environment, and identify a number of potential accident situations and suggest ways to prevent their occurrence. Importance of first aid training, outlining the role of the first aid in the event of an accident, the various categories of PPE, and give some examples and applications of each.
The conceptual framework
In this module, occupational health and safety is a discipline with a broad scope involving many specialized fields. A warehouse team member should not undertake a task until they know how to carry it out safely. Each member of the warehouse team has the responsibility to be on the lookout for unsafe acts or unsafe conditions, and a warehouse is not a playground and should not be treated as such. Each warehouse team member is responsible for their own safety and the safety of their fellow workers. Everyone working in the warehouse should receive the correct amount of PPE and be taught how to use it correctly. And the safety committee is responsible for the development, implementation, and administration of the company PPE program. So personal protective equipment is special gear used to protect the wearer from potential warehouse hazards. A hazard assessment audit should be carried out at regular intervals to determine the level required of PPE. And failure to wear the required PPE should result in the appropriate disciplinary action being taken against the offenders. Module 2.3. This time we're going to be talking about emergency situations and precaution. We'll talk about emergency management, hierarchy of emergencies and different types of emergencies. We'll talk about the roles and responsibilities during an emergency and emergency situations. And so what are the learning outcomes of this particular section? We need to distinguish between a minor emergency, a major emergency, a crisis, and a disaster. Primary role players in the event of an on-site emergency occurring. The roles and responsibilities of each role player in the event of an emergency. Types of emergency that could be encountered in a warehouse environment. Importance of maintaining discipline and clear-headedness during an emergency. Process to be adopted in the event of a power outage. Various steps to be taken when observing and reporting a crisis. Recognize the importance of learning valuable lessons from each emergency that we might encounter.
The conceptual framework
In this module, effective organizational and procedural framework has to be developed for dealing with every potential emergency. There are 4 broad classes of emergency that can be identified: minor, a major, disaster, or a crisis, and each emergency needs to be handled based on its severity. During an emergency, designated individuals have a specific role to play, each contributing to safety and the welfare of those affected by the emergency. The person identified as being in overall charge of handling an emergency frequently has the title of responsible person. Some emergency categories, such as fire or flooding, are more likely to occur than, say, any earthquakes or tsunami. Civil disturbances, criminal acts, and bomb threats have become an emergency of great concern to everybody during recent times. When it comes to chemical spills, fires, and gas leaks, these are among the more likely day-to-day emergencies to be encountered in the warehouse. Each emergency that has occurred should be treated as a learning experience, with valuable lessons being learned. Procedures for dealing with emergencies should be incorporated in the employee handbook. Emergency fire drills, etc., should be stimulated at regular intervals to monitor employee responses and evaluate the current emergency procedures. Module 3.1 stores layout, determining space requirements in the warehouse, laying out the warehouse and some of the design principles that we should put in place, different types of storage methods that we might use in the warehouse, and in particular the storage of hazardous goods. So some of the learning outcomes, the importance of allocating sufficient space for both the present and future needs to each warehouse activity, and the factors to be taken into consideration when determining warehouse space requirements, and the need to integrate the materials handling system into the warehouse layout as well. And then draw a basic warehouse layout and label each area of activity and the factors to be taken into consideration with the storage of hazardous goods, and compare and contrast the various storage methods, the need for special care and attention when storing and handling hazardous materials.
The conceptual framework
In this module, a warehouse facility should be designed to cater for the basic space requirements of each functional area, and the warehouse footprint should be developed in harmony with the materials handling requirements. We need to treat the storage areas as a cube rather than a two-dimensional space, and there are a number of well-defined design principles when designing a warehouse facility, and there are 4 storage methods that we went through: dedicated, dynamic, zone, and point-of-use storage. Cross-docking operations involve receipt, break bulk operations, cross-docking consolidation, and loading of goods onto the outbound transportation. We mentioned that mezzanines add a second level to a warehouse facility, increase the warehouse capacity, and help increase the security of the goods being held. And then special care and attention is needed when storing and handling hazardous goods and materials. Module 3.2, which is on productivity and continuous improvement. We need to classify the various resources in our business and then understand how we can change productivity levels within the business. We're going to talk about labor and equipment productivity and warehouse productivity, and also about ergonomics, which is very important when it comes to productivity as well. And then we'll move on to continuous improvement, and we'll talk about the 7 basic quality tools that we should teach everybody in our organization, and then have a look at some continuous improvement techniques. The learning outcomes in this module: productivity, and explain how productivity is measured and the resources available in a company to increase its productivity. At the same time, we need to distinguish between expansion, reduction, and static productivity models, the importance of productivity on a country's well-being, term ergonomics, and how ergonomics is used to increase the level of productivity, what is meant by continuous improvement, and then distinguish between continuous improvement tools and continuous improvement techniques.
The conceptual framework
In this module, productivity is defined as the ratio between the goods and services produced, those are the outputs, and the resources employed, which are the inputs. Productivity in the warehouse is primarily concerned with making the best use of available space, equipment, and the human resources. Ergonomics is the field of study that seeks to design tools and tasks to be comparable with those that use them. Continuous improvement is a systematic, ongoing effort, one that aims to eliminate all forms of waste from a process at each stage along the supply chain. And then we looked at the 7 basic tools available in the continuous improvement initiative, and then the continuous improvement techniques that are used to investigate a process. The tools are used to record and analyze the findings of an investigation. Module 3.3 of materials handling and storage equipment, categories of materials handling equipment, and then some definitions of materials handling and some of the dimensions of materials handling. We'll also look at the PQRST of materials handling and some principles of materials handling, some function-oriented systems, and material transport equipment. We'll also look at dock bumpers and dock levelers, some general guidelines for the use of materials handling equipment, and we'll talk about pallets, storage equipment, order picking systems. The learning outcomes in this module: term materials handling and dimensions of materials handling, the principles of materials handling, explanation of the PQRST of materials handling, and explain its influence on the selection of materials handling equipment, classes of functional oriented materials handling systems, and suggest an application for each. Then compare and contrast the categories of materials transportation systems and give examples for each of these categories. categories. An example of the role that pallets play in the materials handling function, the various storage methods, and suggest a suitable application for each storage method. Distinguish between picker to part and part to picker order picking systems.
The conceptual framework
In this module, 4 principal dimensions of materials handling, which are movement, time, quantity, and space. Principal goal of materials handling, which is to move the maximum safe load possible through the shortest distance at the time it is needed. Then there were the 10 new principles of materials handling that should receive attention when developing and operating a materials handling system. Materials handling systems can be described in terms of their function they perform. A materials transportation equipment can be categorized as conveyors, cranes, hoists, monorails, scissor lifts, and other industrial vehicles. Safe operating practices are an essential element of materials handling. Industrial trucks can be dangerous and are used extensively in the warehouse environment. Pallets are available in many different forms, and they can be made from various types of materials as well. Storage equipment can range from bin shelving to mobile storage units. The 2 methods of order picking, that's picker to part and part to picker. The last section in module 3, which is called transportation, freight management, transportation and different modes of transportation, and how to choose a suitable mode of transportation. And then we'll talk about containers and containerizations and the learning outcomes in this module. The role of logistics in the supply chain. Various transportation systems available for delivering goods to external customers. The process of transporting goods. The modes of transportation. Advantages and limitations of each. Factors to be considered in choosing a suitable mode of transportation. Types of container configurations, and giving an example of where each could be utilized.
The conceptual framework
In this module, transportation is concerned with the movement of goods. A number of alternative transportation systems are available for both inbound and outbound logistics. Carriers can be described as for hire, not for hire. For hire carriers are public or contract carriers. The 5 modes of transportation were air, rail, road, water, and pipeline, each with their own unique characteristics and operating costs. Choosing a suitable mode of transportation requires considering customer, company, product, and environmental characteristics. Containerization, the packing of materials or cargo in large standard containers for the efficient shipping and handling of products in the supply chain. In Module 4.1, talk about classifying and coding stock classification, and coding stock items, and then developing a coding system. We'll look at the design phase, the code characteristics, some important terminology, and automated data collection devices, and the use of automated data collection. The learning outcomes in this module. Purpose for classifying and coding stock in both the manufacturing and distribution environment. Terms, item classification, and item coding. We need to distinguish between the manufacturing stock and non-manufacturing stock. Numeric and alphanumeric meaning and non-meaningful code. Criteria to use when developing a code structure. We then compare and contrast barcoding technology with the use of radio frequency ID technology for automated data collection technique, where automated data collection techniques can be effectively utilized in a manufacturing and warehouse environment.
The conceptual framework
In this module, classification of stock, which is the process of arranging items in suitable groupings based on their degree of similarity. Primary purpose of classifying stock, which is to enable it to be readily identified and stored in a particular location and accurately accounted for. Code, which can be described as a set of symbols designed to be applied to a stock item in order to uniquely identify that item from others. The 4 hallmarks of an efficient coding system were distinctiveness, brevity, uniformity, and significance. And the 3 basic code structures that are available to us are numeric, alphanumeric, and alphabetic. And there's a choice of using a significant code, automated data collection devices that make use of barcoding, radio frequency ID, and voice technology. There are many areas in business where automated data collection technique can be gainfully employed. RF terminals use radio frequency waves to communicate live with the host system or the network. And voice-directed techniques convert computer data into audible sounds and vice versa. Module 4.2, stock taking and stock audit. We'll look at different types of stock take, developing an action plan. What are the purposes of stock taking, and when and where and what count? Steps in conducting a stock count, some do's and don'ts when it comes to stock taking. A stock reduction program, a stock accuracy and reconciliation, and then stock accuracy targets and stock valuation method. And we'll finish up with the cost of inaccurate stock records and maintaining stock integrity, and then benefits of maintaining stock integrity and dealing with excess stocks, and finish up with computerized stock management. So the learning outcomes in this module are going to be why it is necessary to maintain a high level of stock integrity at all times, purpose for taking stock and reconciling the actual count with the book count, and compare and contrast cycle counting with periodic stock take, and give the advantages and disadvantages of each method. Purposes of stock taking, how the ABC principle can be utilized in determining the frequency by which an item is counted, the key step to stock reduction programs, and highlight the significance of each step, different ways in which stock can be valued, benefits of maintaining a high level of stock accuracy.
The conceptual framework
In this module, accuracy of a company's stock record, which is a product of the stock keeping practices that they employ, and the dedication of those responsible for this task. To being efficient is doing the job right, and being effective is doing the right job, and being productive is doing the right job right. Physical stock takes are an annual necessity to satisfy auditor requirements, insurance requirements, or book validation. Where there are large differences between the physical stock take and the book value, obviously there is something that's gone wrong. Counting stock is a chore and one that nobody really enjoys, so where possible, every effort should be made to reduce the work content to a minimum. You can't achieve manufacturing excellence by starting out with poor records. And remember to treat every count as a learning experience. Learn from it and build on the experience gained and the lessons learned. Zero discrepancies is an ideal, of course, and one difficult to achieve, but one that is nevertheless worth pursuing. And some items are easy to count, others are not. Some items should be counted, others should not. Every stock count should be followed by a post-review and a kind of post-mortem. Module 5.1, inbound logistics, goods receiving, and the most important aspect of incoming goods inspection. And then we'll look at the receiving documentation. We'll talk a little bit about packaging and labeling and ISO 7000 symbol, and then classifying dangerous goods and identifying incoming goods and assigning goods to storage areas. So the learning outcomes in this module will be each step in the receiving process, the procedure for dealing with non-conforming goods identified during the receiving process, document used during the receiving process, and compare and contrast the role of quality control inspectors and the receiving warehouse team members during the receiving process. Then identify different categories of packaging and describe the roles of packaging in the supply chain, various classes of dangerous goods, and identify the ISO 7000 symbols and the need to identify all incoming goods prior to them being placed into storage.
The conceptual framework
In this module, it's the receiving of goods, including all goods delivered to the warehouse, irrespective of their source. All incoming goods must be properly accounted for immediately upon their receipt at the warehouse. We must have a clearly defined process must be in place for dealing with all non-conforming receipts, and a distinction must be made between the role of the quality control team and the warehouse team during the receiving process. Several documents are required to ensure that the correct goods are ordered and properly received. And the goods received note, or sometimes called the goods received voucher, is used to record any discrepancies identified during the receiving process. No movement of goods should take place without the correct documentation being processed. Packaging, which falls into three broad categories: non-returnable, charged for, or to be charged for. All stock items should be correctly labeled at the earliest possible moment to assist assist in their ease of identification. And ultimately, the receiving area should be cleared of all incoming goods as soon as it is practicable after their receipt into inventory. Module 5.2, stock issues. Authorization of issues, issuing procedures, the documentation that we might use in issuing, identification and timing of issues, and different types of issues. We'll also talk about the order cycle, order picking, marshalling and shipping, order tracking, the learning outcomes in this module. Importance of obtaining the correct level of authorization for each class of issue. Methods for authorizing withdrawals from the warehouse. Advantages and disadvantages of each method in the issuing process. And then distinguish between the process of issues using a materials requisition and a picking list. Document used during the issue process and give the purpose of each. Types of issues from a warehouse. The ways in which picking can be carried out. How order tracking provides a means by which an order can be identified from supply source to the end user.
The conceptual framework
In this module, the efficiency and effectiveness of warehouse operations, which are evident by the level of customer service provided. Each issue made to an internal customer or external customer must be properly authorized. A structured process must be in place to manage and control those stock issues. A sequence number of documents accompany each stock issue, and the order cycle consists of order placement, order processing, order preparation, and order shipment. Timing of issues is an important consideration affecting both stock issues and the stock value. And there are several types of issues that the warehouse team will be required to handle. The four methods of order picking are batch picking, sectional picking, traveling picking, and paperless picking. And an order picking priority system must be developed from a list of order characteristics to which a priority can be assigned. And lastly, order tracking provides a means by which an order can be identified from its source, supply source, right through to the end user. Through module 5.3, which is on stock return. And we'll talk about goods return. And there are really two types of goods returns. We have returns from external sources, and we maybe have returns from internal sources, such as our production facilities. And then we'll look at particular warehouse returns processing. And so the learning outcomes for this session are going to be distinguished between the procedures of dealing with internal and external returns, and then identify the possible causes of returns from internal and external sources, consequences of not handling returns correctly, the warehouse return process, the range of possibilities for handling product disposition at the end of the day.
The conceptual framework
In this module, both internal returns and external returns should initially be evaluated to determine the current condition. External returns are from the marketplace and include warranty claims, damaged goods, unwanted goods, and product recalls. Some items are non-returnable, and that includes things like computer software, pharmaceuticals, made-to-order items, and music CDs. There are 5 stages to warehouse returns processing: receipt, sorting, stage processing, return analysis, and support operation. Internal returns are from the workplace and include faulty items, access to requirements, and maybe quality rejects. Module 5.4, which is going to be on reverse logistics, we'll talk about reverse logistics and integrated reverse logistics, and some recovery options, recycling, and reverse logistics and the environment, and then cash for junk. The learning outcomes in this module: to distinguish between forward logistics and reverse logistics, importance of reverse logistics on the environment, what is meant by product recovery management, recovery options, the role of reverse logistics, what is meant by the phrase "one man's junk is another man's treasure."
The conceptual framework
In this module, reverse logistics refers to the efficient reuse of products and materials. Product recovery management is a procedure to deal with the care of products and the materials after they've been used. ISO 14001 is an international standard that specifies requirements for an effective environmental management system. Correct and timely information is paramount to the process of reverse logistics. There are a number of recovery options available for determining the best way to deal with goods returns. And in reverse logistics, just remember, one man's junk is another man's treasure. Module 5.5, and here we're going to talk about distribution management, outsourcing, and third-party logistics provider and fourth-party logistics providers, and then some other transportation agencies, and then finish up with some distribution networks. So the learning outcomes for this session: the role of outsourcing in your business, one or more non-core activities, advantages of outsourcing one or more non-core activities. Then we need to distinguish between the service provided by 3PLs and 4PLs, outline the role of other transportation agencies for alternate distribution channels.
The conceptual framework
In this module, companies today have the option of outsourcing any number of their non-core business activities. Third-party logistics companies provide their clients with a service, and fourth-party logistics providers provide their clients with a solution. Logistics and distribution is that part of the supply chain responsible for organizing the storage and distribution of goods. And then distribution network channels include direct shipment, shipment with milk runs, the use of distribution networks, and lastly, the cross-docking operations.